Later in the day, you help mend a neighbor's canal wall. The fiber nettings come loose and water's trying to sneak in where it shouldn't. You jam in willow stakes, braid reeds, and pack mud like it's Play-Doh therapy. The whole time, your hands move automatically. You realize you've memorized the textures, the ratios, the give of good clay. Your fingers are becoming chinampa fingers. A young boy shows you a carved obsidian beetle he found while digging. You examine it together, guessing at its purpose. A charm? A tool handle? Historians still argue whether such objects were mere decorations or parts of larger ritual assemblies. Either way, it's beautiful. And he tucks it into his sash, like treasure. By evening, the cycle reset is nearly done. The chinampas have been fed, thanked, and tucked in. A few are already blanketed in fresh mulch and leaf litter, ready to rest through the cooler season. Others are being prepped for dry season crops, onions, radishes, and hardy greens. You help plant a few rows of garlic. There's something comforting about beginning a new cycle on the same day the old one ends. The garlic bulbs go in like secret promises, tucked deep beneath the surface. The sun sets in a splash of orange and lilac. You float in your canoe, gliding slowly between the plots, watching reed lanterns flicker to life. Some are set afloat on the water, tiny glowing islands honoring ancestors, earth, and effort. The reflections shimmer like stars come to nap in the lake. And as you drift, a soft wind brushes your cheek. It smells of maize husks, damp soil, and smoke from someone roasting peppers. You close your eyes. You've worked, witnessed, worshipped, and now you just float. You don't need to understand every glyph, every chant, or every scholarly debate about obsidian beetles to know this. Something about this system is deeply, instinctively, right. And now, wind down. We slow everything down. The lake's surface evens out into a mirror, the breeze settles into whispers, and the last of the reed lanterns fades into glowing memory. Your chinampa lies behind you, silent and still, like a trusted friend already asleep. The soil is dark and rich, the canals faintly glimmering in the moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, a heron croaks once, then tucks its head beneath its wing. There's nothing else you need to do. Every furrow has been smoothed, every vine has been thanked. Your paddle rests across your knees, and your body settles into the rhythm of gentle water rocking beneath you. Even the frogs have paused their chorus. And in this moment, this delicate space between effort and rest, you feel it all connect. You, the soil, the lake, the wind, the stars, tied together not by ceremony or obligation, but by rhythm, a shared breath between seasons. You wake up before the sun, just as a pale pink blush starts to stretch across the lake's belly. The world is quiet, still swaddled in dew and soft shadow. Today's not about planting or harvesting, it's about ritual, thanks, and balance. You step barefoot onto the chinampa, your toes already knowing the path without needing to look down. There's a palpable hush this morning, a collective pause. Everyone knows what today is, the end of the agricultural cycle. The plants know it, the birds know it, even the fish are swimming slower, like they're observing something solemn. You're here to participate in the chinampa closing ceremony, a quiet festival of gratitude. It starts with offerings. You kneel at Señor Fuego's base, now surrounded by the drying remains of his squash empire. In your hand, you place 3 items, a kernel of maize, a pinch of amaranth, and a tiny carved frog. It's not elaborate, but it's intentional. These are your thanks, for food, for strength, and for not sinking your canoe last Tuesday. Others come too, laying out their own tokens. A young girl brings a clay whistle shaped like a hummingbird. A grandmother sprinkles chili powder in a slow circle. A teen boy offers what appears to be his lucky fishing hook. It's not flashy, but it's sincere. That's the point. Then come the chants. A soft hum begins among the older farmers. You join in, unsure at first, but the rhythm is slow and looping, easy to fall into. It's not a song so much as a tone, an atmosphere, like humming with your eyes closed. The chinampas themselves seem to hum back. The lake breathes. The trees lean in. As the ritual fades, everyone returns to their plots for the cycle reset. You begin dismantling the temporary reed shade you built last month, carefully, piece by piece, because these materials are reused, not discarded. Even Señor Fuego gets a break. You untie his shoulder vines and gently lower him onto a resting stone, where he'll stay until planting begins again. Next is soil renewal. You grab a woven basket and head for the lake edge where the latest batch of lake mud has settled, rich in algae, bacteria, and fish poop. You sling the heavy basket up to your shoulder, staggering a bit, okay, a lot, and trudge back to the chinampa. Dump, spread, repeat. This process of replenishing the topsoil isn't just maintenance, it's philosophy. Every year, the lake gives. Every year, you return what you can. It's part of the chinampa code. What's taken is honored, what's left is nurtured. You're not just a farmer, you're part of an ongoing conversation with the mud. You remember something Isel told you. We don't own the land, we owe the land. She said it while elbow deep in canal weeds, so it came out more like, we don't own, tui, this stuff stinks, but yeah, owe the land. Still, it's stuck.
Your basket overflows, and someone swaps it out for a fresh one.
This is how you know you've made it. Halfway through the morning, the Chinampa Collective gathers for produce comparison. It's informal, lightly competitive, and oddly endearing. People arrange their vegetables on reed mats like weirdly committed artists. Señor Fuego wins Most Dramatic Squash, which you pretend to be modest about, but secretly high-five yourself over. One guy brings a mutant two-headed chili, and everyone cheers like it's a baby goat riding a llama. There's a whispered rumor that last season, someone grew a maize cob with 4 husks and was immediately promoted to community planner. Lunch follows with trading. You swap your surplus squash for guavas, your extra amaranth for dried beans, and a few chili bundles for a woven sash dyed with cochineal. It's the Aztec version of a farmer's market, minus the food trucks and reusable tote bags. While you munch a roasted pepper stuffed with beans, Isel points to a nearby canoe tied loosely to the canal stake. That one, she says, is yours now. You've earned your chinampa. And just like that, you're no longer the clueless visitor with uneven tan lines and mud in your socks. You're a chinampa owner. You take the canoe out for a celebratory loop, drifting lazily past other floating farms. Some are harvesting flowers, marigolds and dahlias for ritual and trade. Others are already prepping winter crops, root veggies, legumes, hardy herbs. The system never really sleeps. It just exhales for a moment, then starts again. You pass a pair of teenagers tossing fish guts into compost buckets and laughing too loudly. A woman down the canal yells, "Keep it in the pile, not in the lake, unless you want the herons moving in again." They groan. You smile. It's comforting to know that even in a perfectly balanced eco-utopia, teenagers will still be teenagers. As you return, you notice the ritual stones buried near the Chinampa's boundary. One has shifted slightly, revealing a carved glyph worn almost smooth. Probably a fertility marker, someone suggests. Historians still argue whether these were family emblems or tied to lunar planting schedules, or just spiritual reminders that farming was never purely physical. By sunset, your reed mat is covered in your day's work. Maize, squash, amaranth, tomatillos, chilies, herbs, and a few rogue beans that escape their pod like tiny rebels. You tie it all into bundles using maguey fiber and stack it gently in the canoe. The lake reflects the golden sky, and your paddle dips into water like a signature. Around you, chinampas glow in the low light. Quiet islands of effort, floating in a world designed for patience. You're tired, deliciously tired. Your arms ache in a good way, your back hums with the rhythm of movement, and the morning mist rolls in like a soft secret.
It curls around the reeds and sits low on the water, draping everything in hush. You're standing at the edge of your chinampa, holding a basket, feeling like the mysterious lead in a very muddy romance novel. Today is harvest day. But not just any harvest. It's your first full yield. The beans, the maize, the squash, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican agriculture are finally ready. You cradle your basket like it's a baby goat and step onto the soil that has become something like an old friend, lumpy, temperamental, and reliably underfoot. You start with the amaranth, the underdog grain. It's bright magenta and grows with the swagger of a plant that knows it was once offered to gods. The seeds are tiny and annoying to gather, but your neighbor shows you a trick. Rub them between two rough stones, like giving them a tiny massage. The seeds rain down like golden pepper, and your hands smell faintly floral. Historians still debate whether amaranth's association with ritual sacrifice led to its partial ban during the Spanish conquest, or if it was simply misunderstood for being too nutritious and too easy to grow. Either way, you're grateful it made a comeback. It makes a pretty decent pancake. Next comes the maize. It towers above you now, a swaying crowd of leafy giants. You pull down each ear with a satisfying snap, husking it to reveal pale yellow kernels, some with a blush of pink or streaks of blue. This isn't supermarket corn. This is heirloom drama corn. Every cob tells a story, and some of them look like they've seen things. Nearby, a chinampa elder named Izel teaches you the ceremonial harvest chant, a soft repetition of thanks to the earth, the sun, the lake, the wind. You mumble your way through the words, but your heart's in it. There's a quiet pride that comes from growing something that grew you right back. Then, squash, or as you now think of it, Señor Fuego's extended family. The vines curl dramatically across the chinampa like green cursive, and the gourds themselves come in all shapes, some round and plump, others long and twisty like agricultural question marks. You use a sharpened obsidian flake to cut them free, watching the sap bead where the stem was. The squash blossoms you've been harvesting earlier in the season, those tender yellow flutes fried into dreams, are now spent, curled back, their job done. The gourds sit heavy in your basket like sleepy turtles. You whisper thanks to each one because, honestly, it just feels right. Next, you pull up chili peppers. Tiny, evil red things that will definitely be fun in tomorrow's breakfast and less fun 2 hours after that. You pluck tomatillos, green orbs wrapped in papery husks, and marvel at how the husks protect the fruit like little natural gift bags. You tug a few sweet potatoes from the softer soil.
You loosen the upper layer of soil to aerate the roots and pull out invaders, creeping vines, opportunistic grasses, and one impressively smug dandelion. There's also waterside management. Along the canal edges, you reinforce soft spots with fresh-cut reeds and woven willow stakes. These hold soil in place and provide landing spots for friendly insects, which is great for pest control. A few kids are splashing nearby, chasing dragonflies and collecting empty snail shells, which will later be crushed into calcium-rich fertilizer. Nothing goes to waste. Not even fun. Midday arrives with a sky so blue, it's practically showing off. You stretch your back and admire your handiwork. The reshaped chinampa is symmetrical, smooth, and kind of gorgeous in a muddy, functional way. Señor Fuego stands tall in the center, now flanked by rows of epazote and chayote vines. You even made him a little mud mound, like a throne. He seems pleased. Lunch appears via canoe, a tamal stuffed with beans and pumpkin seeds, wrapped in corn husk and still warm. You eat while sitting on your chinampa's edge, feet dangling above the water, watching tiny fish nibble at reed roots. You catch sight of a water turtle blinking lazily at you. Mutual respect. You nod. In the afternoon, the entire chinampa co-op comes together to do communal reshaping. Every few weeks, neighboring farmers help one another patch up shared boundaries and tidy canals. There's laughter, a bit of teasing, and lots of mud throwing that starts out functional and becomes suspiciously fun. You learn that every chinampa has its personality. Some rise stubbornly no matter how you pack the mud, others sag like lazy couches. A few even seem to migrate slightly each year, earning nicknames like Wanderer or that one with the tilt. To close the day, you're invited to help set up canal reflectors. Reed mats laid on the water to bounce sunlight upward, aiding photosynthesis for lower leaves. It's part science, part superstition. The plants like to see themselves grow, someone jokes. As the sun dips low, casting golden shapes on the canal, you float gently back to the main chinampa, paddle in your lap, legs sore and happy. Your hands are caked in mud. Your face is sunburned in precisely 1/2 circle around your nose, and your heart feels strangely centered. You dream tonight not of gods or kings, but of dirt, of perfect angles, of reshaped beds that hold strong through rain and flood, molded with intention, remolded with care. Your chinampa breathes beneath you, and you, at last, know its rhythm. You're dreaming of squash blossoms doing ballet, when the rhythmic thunk-thunk of something wooden brings you back. You blink, groggy, and find yourself face to face with a man, swinging a flat paddle into the soil, not aggressively, but with method, intent. It's time, he tells you, for shaping and reshaping the chinampa. Like gardening meets sculpture, but with more sweat, and the occasional leech.
Chinampas don't stay perfect all on their own. The lake is always tugging at them, waterlogging one edge, drying another. Without regular shaping, they'd morph into soft-boiled trapezoids or float off entirely like extremely nutritious houseboats. And so, today, your job is geometry with mud. You grab your paddle, basically a giant tamper, flat and wide, and follow along the chinampa edge. You press down the perimeter like smoothing icing on a melting cake, adjusting the angles to keep water runoff predictable. A good chinampa is slightly convex at the center, like a lazy loaf of bread. It helps with drainage and makes everything feel just a little smugly well-designed. The others are busy too, padding in silence like monks in a mud monastery. One woman sculpts her chinampa edge with such precision you suspect she once carved temples. Another hums softly, poking the soil with a reed stick to check for softness, Aztec version of poking a cake to see if it's done. There's an art to reshaping. The soil must be wet enough to mold, but not so sloppy that it collapses. You fetch water from the canal, splash it across a particularly crusty section, then use a reed rake to blend it in like frosting with a fork. Mud squishes between your toes. It's gross. You also kind of love it. Then comes trenching. You and your paddle crew dig tiny diagonal furrows across the surface of the plot. Not just for looks, these shallow ditches help manage rainwater and control root spread, plus they make your chinampa look like a giant mudslick waffle, which is objectively delightful. In one trench, you discover something odd. A perfectly round stone, etched faintly with a spiral. You turn it in your palm. Markers, someone says, used for ritual boundary blessings or just to stop kids from expanding their chinampas too far. Historians still argue whether such objects had spiritual significance or were just Aztec property lines. As you kneel to rebury the stone, because, come on, you're not that tourist, a young girl trots by with an obsidian-tipped measuring rod and a determined look. She's learning to calculate spacing between beds. Turns out, it's tradition to teach geometry early. Aztec agriculture is part math class, part life prep. Once your chinampa's edges are firm, the next step is weeding and loosening. You crawl between rows of maize and beans with a claw-shaped digging stick called a koa. It's surprisingly elegant, like a prehistoric garden trowel designed by someone who loves you.
As the compost bakes gently under the midday sun, Teo offers you a taste of the compost tomato, a variety grown especially well on super rich beds.
It's one umbezat to compost, especially libi. It is wife ya la Elodie la Aimée.
It's small, oddly purple, and explodes in your mouth like sweet sun-warmed jam. You let the juice run down your chin,
That
Teo says proudly.
is fermented luxury.
While you chew, you help him construct a vermicomposting tube, basically a reed tube filled with wet leaves buried vertically with an open top. Earthworms are added by hand, and in return for this honor, they produce some of the richest fertilizer on Earth. It's like a high-end apartment for squiggly soil architects. Nearby, another farmer is boiling fish heads with chopped banana peels in a clay pot. You tilt your head. She grins. Liquid fertilizer. She pours the bubbling sludge into a gourd sprayer and mists her chinampa with the enthusiasm of someone watering orchids. You're not sure whether to applaud or run, but the plants look very happy. There's also an ongoing experiment: mushroom composting. In shaded corners of some chinampas, clusters of oyster mushrooms sprout from damp wood shavings and old maize husks. They're both food and fuel. Once harvested, the leftover fungus dirt goes back into the soil. It's a perfect loop. Kind of like how your old shoes become sandals, then firewood, then part of the ash used to fertilize your tomatoes. The chinampa world doesn't waste a thing. You pause for a moment, mud on your forearms, watching a dragonfly land on the edge of your gourd bowl. It's shimmering, electric blue. It stays just long enough for you to feel like you're in a dream sequence, then zips off. The evening is quiet and warm. The compost beds are steaming lightly, like they're whispering secrets to the stars. You sit beside the drying reed mats, massaging your composted hands with a mixture of aloe sap and ash. It's a local remedy for skin burns and terrible life choices. Teo walks by with a gourd of pulque and hands you a sip. It's fizzy, slightly sour, and full of tiny floating chunks that you do your best not to analyze. "To the dirt," he says, raising his drink. "To the dirt," you echo, smiling. Somewhere in the night, a frog lets out a long, contemplative ribbit. Maybe about compost, maybe about life, maybe just gas.
Oh, you okay? I love cosmic. I love cosmic. Que soy yo y you.
The day begins with birds arguing overhead and the soft sound of a paddle slicing the water. Schlup, schlup, like nature's metronome. You're groggily crunching into a roasted maize cob when you notice it. A group of older chinampa caretakers gathered in a half circle, nodding seriously at a pile of dirt. Not just any dirt. This is compost, and today, you're joining their elite and very fragrant ranks. Aztec composting is no joke. It's precise, ritualistic, and a little bit gross. But in the floating world of chinampas, it's the quiet powerhouse, the engine behind every bean sprout and squash blossom. Without compost, there are no vegetables. Without vegetables, there's no life. And without life, well, you'd have to go back to your regular job. And nobody wants that. You step closer. The compost pile steams softly like it just woke up angry. It's made from a careful blend of lake mud, decaying plants, animal droppings, fish bones, and human waste. Yes, really. The Aztecs, ever resourceful, operated public toilets that funneled everything into collection jars for redistribution onto the fields. You know, like community service, but with more enzymes. Historians still debate whether this recycling effort was purely utilitarian or if there were ceremonial elements attached to compost rituals, given how closely food life and soil were connected in Aztec cosmology. Your guide today is Teo, a compost connoisseur with an uncanny ability to tell soil acidity by smell. He hands you a flat-bladed shovel and points at a pile that's just ready. You begin the sacred act of turning the compost, flipping it from the bottom up so that air reaches the deeper layers. The smell is layered, a little earthy, a little tangy, and once or twice, deeply alarming. But there's also something reassuring about it. This is life returning to life. This is transformation. A rotten tomato becomes tomorrow's salsa. It's kind of poetic if you don't breathe too deeply. As you work, Teo explains the layering technique. Dry leaves on the bottom, wet waste on top, followed by soil, ash, and crushed shells. It prevents odor, balances acidity, and encourages decomposition. The key is moderation. Too much fish and your compost smells like a dockside horror. Too much ash and it clumps like bad frosting. Once your pile is flipped and happy, you wheelbarrow it over to the chinampa beds.
A generous handful goes to the amaranth row, another to Señor Fuego, who now towers chest high with an air of mild arrogance. You sprinkle some compost around his base and whisper, "Stay humble." Next comes a mud cake session. A layer of compost mixed with canal mud spread across the surface of the chinampa to revitalize the topsoil. This soft, dense mixture is warm to the touch and feels oddly satisfying between your fingers. You smooth it out like frosting on a giant earthy cake. If this whole farming thing fails, maybe you'll start a mud spa franchise.
After lunch, Sitlali invites you to help her construct a new seedling platform using reeds, mud, and patience. First, you lay a reed mat over a thick bundle of buoyant water lilies. Then comes a layer of black lake mud, rich and sticky, followed by a dusting of crushed eggshells. Keeps the pH balanced, she says, as though you were likely to forget your chinampa chemistry exam. You plant rows of amaranth seedlings, their tiny leaves barely poking through the soil like shy party guests. You water them with lake water steeped in calcium-rich ash and tuck the platform near the canal edge, anchoring it with reed stakes driven into the lake bed. It bobs gently, like a baby cradle. You resist the urge to rock it and sing lullabies.
You also learn about floating fences, made by tying thick reed bundles together and staking them between chinampas to prevent canal erosion and drifting. These soft walls are part practical engineering, part living art, as some farmers plant flowers on top, morning glories, cempasúchil, or trailing vines that look like nature's tinsel. As you rinse off in the shallows, another farmer shows you her reed-based pest cages, small, dome-like covers placed over vulnerable seedlings. Light gets in, bugs don't. They look like tiny reed helmets, and you briefly consider crafting one for Señor Fuego, just for the aesthetic. Sitlali tosses you a damp reed strip. "Belt?" she asks. You tie it around your waist and suddenly feel like part of the club. A slightly itchy club, but still. Evening sets in with a golden glaze, the light slanting through the reeds and shimmering on the canal like glitter spilled by the gods. You and Sitlali load the remaining bundles onto a raft and tow them gently back to the chinampa. The water reflects everything, the reeds, the sky, your very sunburned forehead. Back at home base, you help stack the unused reeds in a neat arching shape, an impromptu shrine to today's effort. Some are set aside to dry for future use. Others are soaked again for mat weaving tomorrow. Before you part ways, Sitlali offers you a gift, a single braided reed loop. For luck, she says, or for tying up your hair when it gets windy. Depends on the day. You accept it with both hands. Night falls like a slow curtain, and your entire chinampa seems to sigh. Frogs croak, reeds whisper. A paddle dips in the distance. You sit by the canal, feet dangling, and hum a little tune. The reed bracelet itches your wrist just slightly, like a gentle reminder. Tomorrow, we build again.
Next up, manual patrol. You're handed a narrow paddle and instructed to tap the underside of maize leaves. Sure enough, a few moth larvae tumble off into a waiting gourd bowl below. They wiggle unhappily. You try not to name them. It makes things harder. Texcoco also shows you how to plant repellent herbs like epazote, mint, and wormwood in strategic spots between the crops. Their strong scents confuse insects, mask the scent of vegetables, and, occasionally, offend your neighbors. At lunch, you sit beneath a squash trellis, where the leaves form a perfect patchwork ceiling. The breeze carries the scent of crushed mint and damp soil. You share tamales, wrapped in fragrant avocado leaves, and watch a water bird try and fail to land gracefully on a floating gourd. You silently give it a 5.2 for effort. Back at your chinampa, you find signs of a nocturnal visitor. Small paw prints, shredded leaves, and one tragically flattened bean sprout. You report this to Texcoco, who squints at the ground and declares, "Possum," or a disrespectful dog. To deter nighttime raids, you help string noise charms, made of clay beads and dried pods, around your chinampa edge. When the wind blows, they clatter gently, a sound said to keep away animals and invite the protective spirit of Tlaloc, the rain god. Whether he actually guards vegetables is unclear. Historians still debate his job description. There's also the occasional use of decoy plants. You plant something especially fragrant, like marigold or sacrificial lettuce, near the edges, to attract pests away from more valuable crops. It's like leaving out cookies for burglars. You finish your rounds by applying a diluted chili tea spray over the Chilquaque row. Señor Fuego still stands proud. You give him a gentle nod and mutter, "No bugs on my watch." As the sun dips lower, the canal glows gold. You perch at the corner of your chinampa, feet dangling in the water, and listen. The frogs are chirping. A breeze carries the faint jingle of pod charms. And Texcoco rows by, frogs in tow, waving with the regal air of someone who has never lost a war to an aphid. There's something satisfying about today's work, about guarding something small and green with so much intention. You think of the hidden battles taking place under each leaf, and how these quiet acts of defense sustain the entire floating city. You sip a final cup of maize tea, and somewhere in the distance, a duck sneezes again. You smile. No casualties today. A soft mist rises over the canals this morning, curling lazily through the air like a slow exhale. Everything feels muffled, gentle, and suspiciously quiet, which, in chinampa terms, usually means something's planning to nibble your beans. Sure enough, as you shuffle down the reed path with sleep still clinging to your eyelids, you hear the unmistakable squelch of mud that's been tampered with. A quick peek under a squash leaf confirms it. Something's been feasting, and it wasn't you. Today, your task is pest management, the delicate art of keeping your floating paradise from turning into an all-you-can-eat buffet for creepy crawlies. Welcome to the most underrated battlefront of the Aztec agricultural world. You begin by surveying your crops like a sleepy general inspecting the troops. The maize stalks look fine, standing proud and unbothered. The beans are mostly okay, but the chili plants? Two are visibly sulking. One even has a leaf curling in a way that screams, "I give up." Enter Texcoco, the pest master, a short woman with the posture of a broom handle and the focus of a laser beam. Her basket overflows with odd tools, powdered limestone, crushed chili paste, rabbit dung, don't ask, and several small frogs on leashes. You quickly learn that pest control here is less spray and pray and more natural enemy matchmaking. She starts by showing you how to create insect barriers using ash and ground chili, sprinkled in a thin ring around the most vulnerable plants. Keeps the ants and weevils out, she explains, and spices the soil in case your carrots are feeling bland. You snort. She doesn't. Then she dips a reed brush into a thick paste of fermented onion and chili juice. "This," she says, "is your war paint." You smear it across the base of a beanstalk and immediately regret inhaling through your nose. Your sinuses file a formal complaint. Still, it's surprisingly effective. You watch as a trail of ants approaches, sniffs the air, and performs a dignified U-turn. Victory. You spend the next hour crafting sticky traps using resin from copal trees, smeared onto bark and tied near plant bases. Tiny beetles wander onto them and stick like bad decisions. Texcoco chuckles approvingly. Historians still argue whether the Aztecs developed these techniques purely through observation, or if some were handed down via ritual knowledge passed from priest-farmers. Either way, it's clear this is less science lab, more living experiment. As you move through the rows, Texcoco introduces you to her secret weapon, amphibians. Tiny, bright green frogs that live in damp woven baskets tucked under the chinampa edges. They eat the gnats, the flies, the worm larvae, she says. And if you treat them nicely, they sing for you at night. You hold one carefully in your hand. It blinks slowly, as if judging your soul. Then it leaps back into the basket. Fair enough. You beam. The committee moves on. Lunch is roasted tamales with wild greens, eaten under the shade of a willow tree you didn't realize had grown that much since you arrived. A child brings you a cup of cactus water, which tastes like someone whispered lime into a bottle of gelatin, but you drink it anyway. After lunch comes pruning. You learn that not all chili flowers need to become fruit. Too many, and the plant exhausts itself. It's like a metaphor for modern life. So you carefully pinch off the smaller buds, apologizing as you go, while Heats mutters, "Less is spice." One farmer insists on painting tiny faces on their chili pods with natural dyes. It scares the aphids, they claim. You don't believe them, but you admire the creativity. Soon you're adding cartoon eyes to one especially feisty pepper. You name it, Señor Fuego. As the day heats up, the air fills with the spicy green smell of crushed chili leaves and sun-warmed soil. It's oddly refreshing, if a bit sneezy. You sneeze, a duck sneezes. You share a moment, you learn about companion planting too. The chili rows are bordered with marigolds and epazote, herbs that both repel pests and add to the soil's complexity. It's an ancient practice, balancing flavor, protection, and superstition. Historians still debate how much of companion planting was botanical science versus generational luck passed down as truth. Heats gestures to your final row. Now for the wild card, he says, handing you Chilhuacle negro seeds. Rare, temperamental, and deeply flavorful, these chilies were once reserved for noble feasts and sacred offerings. Planting them is a statement, or a cry for help. You make a small ceremony of it, drawing a circle in the soil and placing the seeds like you're tucking in babies. You even hum again, something vaguely operatic and entirely off-key. This time, the chili plant leans toward you. Progress. By dusk, your body is vibrating with a kind of calm exhaustion. You have a dozen rows of chili plants, each nestled in soil that you mixed, mounded, and murmured over. Some already have the slightest buds. Others seem to be contemplating their life choices. As a reward, Heats brings out chili chocolate, thick, dark, and eye-wateringly spicy. One sip and your sinuses evacuate in protest. Good, right? He says. You nod, through tears. You sit by your chili patch as the sky shifts to lavender. Crickets begin their nightly gossip. Somewhere down the canal, someone's playing a flute, just one long note, over and over, like they're trying to lull the whole lake to sleep. You think of how these plants will grow, strong, spicy, bold. And maybe, just maybe, you'll be known as more than the outsider who fell in a canal that one time. You smile, stretch, and whisper to Señor Fuego, "Don't let me down." He doesn't answer, but he looks ready for anything. It's chili day, and if you thought farming was peaceful, you haven't tried digging next to a pepper plant with something to prove. You start your morning sipping a lukewarm drink made from toasted maize and cacao, more gritty than comforting, and head down to your chinampa, which now feels like your own little universe of mud, reeds, and overly ambitious ducks. Today, you're planting chilies in the northeast corner, or trying to. One of the stalks from yesterday's maintenance has already collapsed dramatically into the canal like it gave up on everything overnight. You prod it back into place with a stick and whisper encouraging things to the soil. "You're doing great, sweetie." As you work, a wiry man named Wheats comes by, balancing a basket on his shoulder that's absolutely brimming with bright red, orange, and green chili seedlings. He's the local capsicum whisperer, known for speaking to his plants and wearing a sash made entirely of dried jalapenos. You pretend this doesn't intimidate you. "You ready?" he asks. You nod, like someone who knows what they're doing. He hands you a seedling and says deadpan, "It bites back." Planting chili isn't that different from maize or squash, but it demands more space and less drama. The soil must be well drained, and the plants hate having their roots too wet, so you nestle them into slightly raised mounds, a clever trick the Aztecs perfected centuries ago. That subtle lift prevents root rot and makes it easier to give each plant its own little spotlight. Basically, they're the prima donnas of the chinampa stage. Each mound gets a small piece of charcoal buried beneath it, a traditional technique that boosts the soil's potassium and helps retain nutrients. Wheats tells you some farmers even sing to their chili rows, believing that certain tones encourage stronger growth. You try humming something tuneless and hopeful, and one chili leans slightly away. Rude. The Aztecs didn't just grow chilies for food. They were an essential part of medicine, ritual, and even warfare. You're told that powdered chili was sometimes used as a smoke weapon to drive out intruders or discourage nosy neighbors. Historians still argue whether this was a battlefield strategy or just really aggressive pest control. As you plant, Wheats shows you how to craft simple chili collars. Thin rings of woven reeds placed around the base of each plant. They discourage bugs and trap warmth. Plus, they look charming, like little hats for very serious vegetables. After about an hour, you pause to wipe your forehead and notice a group of farmers walking slowly along the chinampa's edge. They're conducting the morning inspection, part tradition, part quality control, and part social event. Each farmer gets quiet nods or approving grunts as they point at particularly robust squash or unusually symmetrical maize. When they reach your chili mounds, Wheat speaks first. They've got potential, he says, like a director evaluating a nervous audition.
As the sun begins to slide toward the horizon, you sit beside Coatl and hand him a piece of roasted maize you didn't know you had. He takes it, chews slowly, and says, "You did good. Not great, but good." You smile. That's basically a gold star out here. He nods toward the water. Tomorrow, we plant the chili rose. You'll like that. They fight back. These mats help hold the soil in place, especially during rainy season when flooding can cause erosion. You help a small group stake one into the mushy border using pointed willow sticks that double as potential future trees. Willow is the MVP here. Fast-growing, water-loving, and resilient. Honestly, it's the Tom Hanks of the plant world. They show you how to interlace the reeds, twisting them into a flexible barrier that absorbs water pressure while allowing some flow. "It breathes like a lung," says a young woman as she pats the mat into place. You believe her. Nearby, someone's chinampa has developed a sag. Not tragic, but noticeable. A team gathers to shovel more tilaliac into the low spot, joking all the while. You offer to help, and one guy hands you a shovel without hesitation. Every chinampa gets tired, he says. Like people. Just needs a little lift now and then. The maintenance isn't just physical. Farmers also use these moments to observe changes in plant health, pest activity, and water clarity. One woman crouches to examine her beans and mutters that something's nibbling at night. She sets a simple floating trap made of gourds and fish guts. You don't ask questions. You take a break and sit on the edge, legs dangling over the water. It's oddly satisfying to look at your muddy hands, your streaked tunic, and the growing pile of improvement on your chinampa. You built nothing today, but you preserved everything, and that here is more important. There's a fringe practice among some chinampa stewards involving aquatic composting. Instead of traditional heaps, organic waste, leaves, stalks, spoiled produce is bundled in porous baskets and suspended just below the waterline. Over time, these bundles attract microorganisms, fish, and insects, creating miniature ecosystems that eventually dissolve into fertilizing mush. Some call it lake tea. You'd prefer not to. You help hang a few of these from a neighbor's chinampa, curious about the tiny snails clinging to the reeds. One child proudly names his bundle compostito, and you swear it smiles at you through the scum. By mid-afternoon, your body aches in ways you didn't know it could. There's dirt in your hair, your sleeves, possibly your soul. But when you stand back and look at the reinforced chinampa, the reshaped canals, and the quietly bubbling compost bundles, you feel a strange and beautiful satisfaction. Even more curious, you start to notice the micro changes. Plants perking up, water flowing more smoothly, a family of ducks moving back into a cleaner corner of the canal. It's like watching a tired friend sit up straighter after a nap and a bowl of soup. And maybe that's the magic. These chinampas don't just float, they persist. With care, with rhythm, with community, and with the occasional frog pastry offering thrown in for balance. You wait to a faint scratching sound, not alarming, just rhythmic, like a brush sweeping gently across something wooden. You open one eye and see an old woman hunched over your neighbor's canoe, sharpening a paddle with calm, practiced movements. "It's not just for rowing," she tells you without looking up. "A good paddle, shaped just right, can move, steer, dig, tap, and, if necessary, discipline a wayward goose." You nod slowly and wonder what you did to deserve that last bit. Today, your task is a little different. You've been invited to observe and maybe participate in the maintenance of the chinampa itself. It turns out these floating farms don't just float gracefully forever. Like houseplants, aquariums, and tax returns, they need regular attention. So get your sleeves up and let's talk infrastructure. Step 1, dredging. You've heard the word before but had no idea it involves so much mud.
Using wide, flat scoops made of wood and obsidian shards, farmers collect the rich sediment from the canal bottom and pile it carefully onto the chinampa edges. This not only refreshes the soil with nutrients, but also helps keep the canal from turning into a glorified puddle. You kneel beside an older farmer named Caudle, who is a local expert in sludge management. That's not a formal title, but it should be. Caudle explains, in a voice that sounds like gravel soaked in honey, that dredging must be done in rhythm, with the seasons and the phases of plant growth. Too early, you drown the roots, he says. Too late, you feed the mosquitoes. You gulp. The mud, called taliak, is so nutrient-dense it practically steams when exposed to the sun. It smells like history and duck breath, and sticks to your fingers like it has unfinished business. You help spread it over a low squash mound, and for the first time feel the tug of real responsibility. This isn't gardening. This is organic architecture. There's a rhythm to it. Scoop, lift, plop. Caudle works with a kind of meditative grace, only pausing occasionally to flick a bug off his shoulder or mutter a prayer to the maize goddess Chicome, whose name, he insists, is the reason his parents named him after a snake. Historians still argue whether the chinampas were maintained on a strict communal schedule or more casually, based on each farmer's needs. Some codices suggest rotating duties, with families assigned to dredge certain sections each month. Others argue that the work was self-governed, inspired more by neighborly guilt than official decree. Whatever the case, community is key. You notice how often people help each other. One family lends a shovel, another sends over extra seedlings. There's no currency exchanged, just quiet nods in the occasional, "You owe me 3 frogs and a tamale" kind of look. After dredging, the next maintenance task involves reinforcing the chinampa edges with woven reed mats called pitlotl. Back at your chinampa, you tuck the ritual frog pastry into the base of your maize stalk. You hope Tlaloc is watching, or at least chuckling. Then, you curl into your hammock, the soft squeak of reeds beneath you, the smell of incense still clinging to your sleeves. Somewhere, a frog croaks approval, and you sleep like a stone. It's dark when you wake this time. Not ominous dark. Just that kind of deep, velvety twilight that makes your brain say no thank you and roll back over. But your neighbor, who insists the moonlight is ideal for fertility rituals, is already out stirring something suspiciously bubbly in a clay bowl. You pull on your woven sandals, try not to trip over the basket of amaranth by the door, and shuffle outside. Tonight, you're going to learn about the ritual and spiritual side of chinampa farming, where planning isn't just biology, it's theology with dirt under its fingernails. Let's be clear, this isn't casual religion. The Aztecs didn't just toss a prayer at the sun and call it a day. Farming was deeply entwined with a pantheon of moody, snack-loving gods, and the chinampa was one of the stages where offerings, chants, and symbolic gestures unfolded like a sleepy opera. You follow your neighbor, whose name, confusingly, is also maize, to a small altar at the chinampa's edge. It's got the essentials: marigolds, maize cobs, a few painted stones, and a clay sculpture of Tlaloc, the rain god with enormous eyes and an expression that says, "I control your hydration, and I know it." Tonight's ceremony is simple, Maize explains. It's a request for balanced rains. Not too much, not too little. You nod solemnly, recalling how last week's mini-flood turned your squash patch into a brief but successful pond. The ritual begins with copal incense, which smells like sweet smoke and long-forgotten libraries. You wave it in the cardinal directions and try not to inhale too enthusiastically. Then comes the offering, bits of maize dough shaped like tiny frogs, placed gently at Tlaloc's feet. Frogs, as it turns out, are Tlaloc's favorite. Also, possibly his messengers. Historians still argue whether real frogs were used in larger temple offerings, or whether frog-shaped pastries were just the PG-rated, chinampa-friendly version. There's a chant, not sung so much as droned in a warm, chest-rumbling way. and you join in with the confidence of someone who's absolutely mouthing half the words. It's hypnotic, and just a little awkward when a toad actually hops into the ceremony like it heard the dinner bell. Then, someone brings out the water jar. It's filled with canal water, but filtered through sand and reeds and touched, apparently, by the moon's reflection. Each person dips their fingers in and flicks droplets onto their crops. It's symbolic, Maize explains, but also practical. Reminds you to hydrate your plants and your spirit. You glance at your corn, which seems to be growing in 12 different directions at once. It accepts the blessing like a diva accepting a spotlight. One of the more senior farmers steps forward next, holding what looks like a bundle of sticks, but turns out to be a carefully bound set of seasonal markers.
As the sun climbs, the smells intensify. Roasting maize, sweet tamales steaming in banana leaves, a fresh fish vendor grilling over a clay oven on his canoe's bow. You try something called ahuatle, often called Mexican caviar, which is really just waterfly eggs. You chew carefully. It's crunchy. You nod and lie. Delicious. Cultural note. Water insects and lake larvae were a huge part of the diet back then, packed with protein and widely harvested from these very canals. And yes, the idea of bug harvesting boats was very real, netting swarms of tiny edible creatures from the lake surface using long poles and patience. Fringe? Maybe. But effective. Back in the denser part of the market, you notice a small square of raised earth near the dock. It's not a farm. It's a demonstration plot. A live-action showcase for new chinampa techniques. Today's demonstration? Vertical reed trellises for climbing beans. The speaker, an enthusiastic gardener with a passion for knots, explains how elevating the plants can increase yield and improve airflow. You take notes, even though you still struggle with horizontal planting. Nearby, a priest from Tenochtitlan is buying white maize for the temples. Ceremonial grade only, he tells the vendor. It must glow under firelight. You don't ask whether that's literal or metaphorical. It's best not to pry when divine snack orders are involved. You pause to look back across the water. From here, the chinampas look like chess pieces on a lazy board. The scale is staggering. Dozens, hundreds of floating plots, each one with its own crops, its own rituals, its own small dramas. It's easy to forget how much labor floats beneath this calm surface. Izel returns, now with fewer vegetables, and slightly more silver jewelry than he had an hour ago. Traded for my sister, he says. You raise an eyebrow. She likes shiny things. You resist the urge to ask if she knows about this exchange. The afternoon grows warmer, and the market starts to quiet. Canoes drift lazily now. Some vendors nap under woven hats. Others gather in a floating circle for a group song about chilies, you think. You lie back in the canoe, fingers trailing in the water, and reflect on the chaotic grace of it all. This isn't just a market. It's an extension of the chinampa system itself. Without trade, the farms would falter. Without the farms, the trade would collapse. And somehow, in the middle of it all, you, a confused visitor with muddy shoes and a stolen reed mat, have become part of the ecosystem. As you paddle back to your chinampa with Izel, you hear a lullaby. Your sleep last night was deep, the kind that makes your limbs heavy and your dreams smell faintly of squash blossoms. You wake up to the low drone of dragonflies and a canoe gently bumping your chinampa like it's asking for sugar. Today, the floating farm takes a back seat. You're going to the market. Xochimilco's canals lead you into the beating heart of trade, the floating tianggui. It's like a pop-up farmer's market on water where everyone's yelling about their prices, but in that friendly, I'll still give you a discount if you smile kind of way.
Canoes bob like shopping carts, and your paddle doubles as both steering device and polite excuse me stick. You quickly realize this is no weekend pastime. This is the lifeline of the city. Chinampa farmers depend on the marketplace to sell what they can't eat themselves, and everything they sell comes with the unmistakable scent of lake mud and hard work. Your canoe mate is a teenage boy named Ezel, who's been hauling his family's produce to market since he could lift a gourd without tipping over. His canoe is a carefully balanced pile of maize, squash, beans, tomatoes, and a suspicious bag that he claims is just tamales. You squint. The bag shifts. He grins. As you drift into the main canal intersection, the scene unfolds like a low-budget Broadway show. Sellers chant prices, buyers bargain with the flair of seasoned thespians, and paddle traffic jams are resolved with dramatic sighs and passive-aggressive maneuvering. Someone loses a squash, someone else gains one. Balance is restored. The produce here is spectacular. Deep purple maize, amaranth that shimmers like velvet, chilies in every shade from sunset to absolutely not. You watch as one woman uses a handmade weight scale, a bent stick with a rock on one end and a handful of avocados on the other. Precision? Debatable. Charm? Off the charts. Ezel explains how bartering still rules the day here. Sure, cacao beans can be used like money, but most folks just trade what they have for what they need. Beans for eggs, squash for fish, a handful of herbs for a gossip update. Historians still argue whether the Aztec marketplace had formal price controls or whether it operated more like a freestyle economy, with priests occasionally stepping in to stop the chilly inflation. You try to barter with a vendor over some woven reed mats. You offer her 3 ears of corn. She laughs, pats your arm, and offers you 1 mat if you throw in a joke. You panic and blurt out something about a maize stalk walking into a bar. It's terrible. She gives you the mat anyway. Pity? Maybe. Progress? Absolutely. The most curious stall of the day belongs to an old man selling floating garden starter kits. He gestures to miniature chinampas, tiny reed rafts with a handful of soil and baby tomato plants already sprouting. Perfect for children, small homes, or training squirrels, he declares. You're tempted to buy one just to ask follow-up questions.
In the center of one chinampa, you notice something strange. A raised planting mound encircled by shallow ditches.
The gardener explains this micro-topography helps manage water flow. Too much rain? The mound drains off into the ditch. Not enough? Water from the canal can be scooped into the trough. It's a humble, elegant solution that wouldn't look out of place in a permaculture manual. You try your hand at making one of these mounds. You're proud of your first attempt, until someone walks by and squints. Is it a hill? Or a crying turtle, they ask. You sigh, flatten it, and try again. During a break, you rest under a willow tree, planted on the edge of the chinampa for shade, stability, and dramatic silhouette potential. The air smells like damp soil and sun-warmed leaves. A woman offers you a cup of pulque, a mildly fermented drink made from the maguey plant. It tastes like plant yogurt, but refreshes your sunburned soul. She toasts to good crops and better naps. As the day wears on, you start to appreciate the nuance of these floating farms. Some chinampas are long and narrow, perfect for quick harvest greens. Others are more square, better for root crops. Some families favor high-density interplanting, packing rows tight to suppress weeds and make every square inch count. Others use more spacing, arguing it gives plants breathing room and less stress. You're not sure if that applies to the squash or the gardener. And then you stumble across a curious sight. A small shrine at the corner of one chinampa. It's just a few clay figures, some food offerings, and a dried bouquet of marigolds. The gardener, an elderly man with more wrinkles than you thought possible, tells you it's for Chicomecoatl, the goddess of agriculture. She likes it when we say thank you, he says, even if the corn is moody this year. You take a moment and nod toward the shrine. The wind rustles the leaves in what you choose to interpret as a divine thumbs up. Later in the day, as you help gather weeds for composting, someone asks you to calculate next month's crop rotation. You freeze. Math? Now? But it's more like a logic puzzle. Which plots had beans? Which need maize next? Who's allergic to squash vines and needs to swap with their cousin? It's less algebra and more chinampa-level matchmaking, and somehow you kind of enjoy it. The sun begins its descent, casting long shadows across the canals. The rows of corn flicker gold. You lean back and gaze at what you helped build. Tall maize stalks catching the breeze, bean vines curling like green question marks, and squash plants sprawling with the confidence of overachievers. The chinampa isn't just a floating farm. It's an ecosystem, a calendar, a neighborhood, and a canvas. And you're learning to read it one leaf at a time. As frogs begin their evening the morning mist hovers like a gentle fog blanket, and your chinampa yawns beneath you. It's becoming second nature now, this floating garden life. Mud in your fingernails, reeds in your socks, a suspiciously sunburned left ear, all part of the experience. Today, you're setting aside the muck and mire for something unexpectedly intricate: the science of crop layout, a sleepy dance of geometry, fertility, and gut instinct. See, planting here isn't a chaotic toss of seeds and crossed fingers. No, these farmers have rules, rhythms, and rotations that rival the efficiency of modern agriculture. Your host this morning, a soft-spoken woman with a wide-brimmed hat made of woven lake grass, explains that planting in straight lines is for amateurs. Here, it's about relationships, between plants, between seasons, between people and their floating dirt patches. First up, the three sisters. Maize, beans, and squash, the classic trio. You've heard of them, maybe in a textbook or on a random podcast you fell asleep during. But here, it's not just legend. It's lunch, dinner, and survival rolled into one. You help plant the maize first, always first. You poke holes into the damp soil with a short stick, drop in the kernels, and cover them gently, like tucking in a very sleepy child. A few days later, the beans will go in. They'll climb the corn stalks like over-enthusiastic roommates, and between them, the squash will spread out, shading the soil and politely elbowing weeds aside. It's more than companion planting. It's an agricultural love triangle. Each sister supports the others. Corn provides structure, beans return nitrogen to the soil, and squash offers protection. Historians still argue whether this specific planting combo was a deliberate discovery or the result of centuries of seasonal trial and error. But either way, it works. Like, really well. Like, we never had fertilizer and we still fed an empire well. You wander over to another plot and find something fascinating. Rows of chilies alternating with marigolds. The gardener tells you it's not just for aesthetics, though the color contrast is chef's kiss, but because marigolds help repel certain pests, and they smell nicer than whatever that was you stepped in this morning. Nearby, a young boy is planting amaranth, an ancient grain with pink feathery plumes that looks like it belongs at a botanical disco. He explains, very seriously, that the seeds are super tiny and require patience. You nod solemnly, having just accidentally dumped half a handful in one spot. He sighs, takes your hand, and begins scooping them back out, with the precision of someone who's been scolded for this before. You realize this isn't just farming, it's generational choreography. Knowledge passed down not in scrolls or scripts, but in dirt-streaked hands and whispers.
It's during this part of the day that you notice something almost architectural. The canals are straight, crisscrossing the chinampas in a tidy grid. They're no accident. In fact, when viewed from above, if you had a very brave eagle and a pair of binoculars, you'd see a massive checkerboard of green and blue mapped with near military precision. The Aztecs didn't just throw gardens onto water, they designed a city into it. Your guide for the afternoon, a wiry man with laugh lines and suspiciously mud-free feet, explains how the canals serve as roads, irrigation channels, and even social spaces.
People trade goods on canoes, visit neighbors, and sometimes sneak off for lakeside gossip that somehow always involves someone borrowing too many chili seeds. You help him collect fresh water lilies that have overgrown into the canal. As you bundle them up, he mentions how water lilies are sometimes left strategically to shade certain areas of the canal, cooling the water and slowing evaporation. Functional and floral. You raise your eyebrows. We call it accidental landscaping, he says with a wink. Lunch is another floating affair. Everyone ties their canoes together, picnic style. Tortillas, roasted beans, tamales again, never not tamales, and a few roasted chilies that absolutely betray your trust. You gulp lake water and hope it doesn't taste like revenge. After lunch, you're invited to help test water levels. This involves sticking your entire arm into the muck beside a test plot and feeling for soil density. There's a lot of ing and try a bit to the left. You pretend to understand what anyone's feeling for, but it mostly feels like cold pudding with secrets. By late afternoon, it's clear that the chinampas are more than just farms. They're part engineered ecosystem, part labor of love, and part semi-domesticated swamp art. You see dragonflies darting between maize stalks. Egrets tiptoe through bean plants, snatching bugs. Every piece is working together. Sometimes cooperatively, sometimes grumpily, but always with purpose. One of the more eccentric gardeners, who wears feathers in her hair and sings to her chili plants, shows you her side experiment, a chinampa with built-in compost trenches. She buries food waste down the center, then covers it with fresh soil and rotates crops around it. You ask if it works. I think so, she shrugs. The chilies are louder this year. As twilight falls, the canal reflects a tapestry of color. Orange from the setting sun, green from the vines creeping out over the water, and dark blue from the sky pulling the light away. Crickets begin their chorus. Fireflies blink along the edges of the chinampas like sleepy lanterns. The workers stretch, joke, and begin their paddle. The chinampa is growing, literally. You wake to the soft rustle of corn leaves brushing against each other, and the occasional squawk of a heron landing far too confidently near your foot. The island feels more solid beneath you now, less sponge cake, more old mattress. Progress. Today, you learn something unexpected. Planting on a floating farm is only half the job. Maintaining it is where the magic lives. And the work never ends. Chinampas aren't some set-it-and-forget-it miracle garden. They're needy, moody, and occasionally vindictive, like tomatoes with trust issues. The first job on today's to-do list, dredging. That's right, you're going to scrape goo off the lake bottom and slap it back on the farm. Your canoe companion, an older woman who looks like she could arm wrestle a jaguar and win, hands you a flat-bladed tool carved from wood. Don't scoop too fast, she warns. The lake remembers who makes a mess. You nod, solemnly, wondering whether that's a metaphor or a weather report. Dredging is slow. You paddle through the narrow canals between chinampas, pushing the blade deep into the silt, and then heaving it up in thick, wet gobs. The lake bottom smells like old soup and ambition. But this muck, nutrient-rich detritus, is pure gold for the plants. It keeps the soil fertile without needing chemical fertilizers or angry gods demanding sacrifices. Each scoop gets added back onto the topsoil of the chinampa, a practice that's both environmentally genius and physically exhausting. The Aztecs figured out a system where the lake is the fertilizer factory, forever churning out the gunk that makes maize stand tall and squash bloom like fireworks. Historians still argue whether this sustainable loop was intentional from the start or evolved slowly as the Mexica observed natural patterns. Either way, they nailed it. You're witnessing an ancient version of regenerative agriculture, long before it became a buzzword used to sell overpriced kale chips. While paddling between plots, you pass by a young man hauling a canoe full of night soil. Yes, the humankind. It's collected from the city and sometimes added to chinampa plots in small, well-composted amounts. The smell makes your eyes water. The young man offers you a toothy grin and says, "Every king's got to sit on a throne. Ours just helps the corn grow." You do not ask follow-up questions. Back at your own plot, another maintenance task awaits: canal upkeep. Without flowing water between the chinampas, things go stagnant fast. Literally. Mosquito breeding parties, mold, algae, even snakes that think your raft is their new timeshare. So the canals must be cleared regularly. Workers take turns using long sticks to push floating debris out into the open lake, while others cut back overgrown reeds.
They also have a sense of humor. One man points to a reed bundle and tells you it contains the secret ingredient. When you look confused, he bursts out laughing. Love, he says, and then immediately adds, "Just kidding, it's fish poop." Once the raft base is in place, the team uses long wooden stakes to secure it to the lakebed. These aren't just any stakes, they're freshly cut saplings, often from willows, because willow branches will root in the water and grow. Over time, they'll become full trees, reinforcing the structure with their own living roots. It's a farming hack and a landscaping flex rolled into one. You watch as they drive the stakes deep into the muck with rock mallets, their movements rhythmic and slow. The sound echoes softly over the lake. Thud, 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 and it almost lulls you back to sleep. Birds wheel overhead. Somewhere, someone's burning incense, and the scent drifts your way on a breeze that briefly smells less like lake and more like civilization. As the sun climbs, the new chinampa starts to take shape. It's just a little rectangle in a sea of reeds and water now, but soon it'll be bursting with beans, squash, chilies, and maize. You run your hand through a scoop of wet compost and marvel at its texture, slimy, gritty, and somehow promising. It's almost like the earth itself is saying, "Go ahead, plant something. I got you." Lunch is a few tamales unwrapped on a canoe paddle, shared between workers who sit side by side on the edge of the chinampa. They trade jokes, argue about the best place to grow tomatoes, and tease one boy who swears a turtle winked at him this morning. You're not sure if that's a compliment or a cause for concern. One of the elders pulls you aside and shows you something fascinating: miniature chinampas, created for teaching. These scaled-down models use reeds, mud, and even tiny corn stalks. Parents use them to train their children, not just in construction but in observation. How water flows, how plants respond to shade, how roots penetrate different soils. It's not just trial and error, it's education by play. Later, you're asked to help build the edges of the new chinampa. The workers show you how to braid reeds into a border, pressing them firmly against the lake water's edge to prevent erosion. It's delicate work, but satisfying, like stitching the hem of something ancient and sacred. Once the structure is done, they sprinkle plant seeds across the surface. Beans, corn, squash, the holy trinity of Mesoamerican agriculture. They pat them gently into the soft, damp soil and walk away. No rows, no tools, just trust in the system, and maybe in the gods. As the sun sets behind the rim of the mountains, you look out over the lake. What once seemed like unbroken swamp now stretches into a geometric patchwork of gardens. From above, it would look like a quilt sewn from green threads, mud patches, and the occasional splash of blue. And you, dear Bill. The next morning, you're awoken by the unmistakable slop of a paddle hitting the lake surface just inches from your head. A passing canoe sends a gentle wave rippling across the chinampa, and you sway slightly, as if still dreaming. The air is thick with humidity, dragonflies, and the earthy perfume of yesterday's mud. Everything squishes. Today you're going to learn something you never expected to care about: the art of weaving islands. Yes, islands, plural, by hand. You stretch and look around. The chinampa builders are already up, hauling fresh bundles of tula reeds and branches across the marsh, stepping over tangled roots with the balance of dancers and the mild irritation
of people who have been bitten by mosquitoes in unfortunate places. One of the younger workers hands you a bundle of stalks and gestures for you to follow. You wade out into the water, which is somehow both cold and warm, and helps exactly 0% with the smell. But the process you witness next is almost hypnotic. First, they lay down a thick bed of interwoven reeds, like a giant mat, you think, except that it's alive, soaking, and slightly teeming with tiny organisms you'd rather not name. Then come branches and twigs, woven crosswise into a rough lattice. Over that, they pile sludge from the lake bottom, scooped up with flat wooden paddles and flopped unceremoniously into place. The sound is halfway between a splat and a sigh. The layers alternate like an ancient sandwich: reed, mud, compost, reed, mud, compost, until the whole thing rises just above water level. It's surprisingly sturdy. You step on one edge and brace for a sinking feeling, but it holds. Well, mostly. Your foot still disappears an inch or two, but at least it doesn't vanish entirely. This early technique of island making is deeply collaborative. Whole families show up to help. Children carry bundles of dry twigs. Elders supervise and complain that back in their day, chinampas were flatter. Everyone gets involved, partly because the work goes faster that way, and partly because the community's literal survival depends on it. And here's a weird little detail for you. Once the basic raft is in place, builders sometimes plant fast-growing grasses or water hyacinths around the edges. Why? Because it helps trap more sediment. The plants form a natural border, catching floating debris and adding thickness to the island's fringe. Basically, it's DIY edging with ecological flair. Historians still argue whether the earliest chinampas were intentionally engineered to mimic wetlands or whether it was a lucky accident. Some scholars believe the builders understood how root systems stabilize soil and designed accordingly. Others think the technique evolved slowly, with each generation making small tweaks until it worked. Either way, by the time you're here watching it unfold, these folks are island-making pros.
And then he points out the neighbors. Other groups in the area, Xochimilca, Chalca, and others, have their own chinampa systems. Some are allies. Some are less so. There are whispers of rivalry, even canal sabotage. One night, someone allegedly sent a canoe full of pigs down a rival's irrigation channel. You don't ask how that ended. The pigs were fine, the canal was not. Historians still argue whether these early farms were genuinely collaborative between ethnic groups or fiercely competitive. Some accounts suggest a peaceful exchange of ideas and seeds. Others hint at tension, with water rights and territory causing frequent scuffles. You figure it was probably a mix of both. Because if there's one thing humans love almost as much as growing food, it's arguing about where to grow it. By mid-morning, the chinampa you're standing on has taken shape. It's narrow, maybe 30 feet wide and 300 feet long, and hemmed in by wooden stakes. These aren't just for structure. They also help define territory, mark boundaries, and keep the whole thing from floating off into the sunset. A few builders hammer the stakes in with large rocks, while another starts planting amaranth, a super grain you've definitely seen on overpriced health food blogs. Back then, though, it's a staple, nutritious, hardy, and great for feeding warriors. You help push a canoe full of seedlings toward the next chinampa and try not to tip it over. Meanwhile, the elder gardener is grumbling about a failed batch of squash that rotted too early. He suspects too much fish gut in the base layer. Balance, he mutters. You must balance the fish guts. You nod solemnly, like this is an ancient proverb. He seems pleased. There's a peaceful rhythm to it all. Scoop mud, layer organic waste, pat it down, plant seeds, paddle back for more. Occasionally, someone breaks in a song, usually off-key, and others join in. A boy loses a sandal in the mud and just shrugs. You imagine this isn't the first time, or the last. You begin to notice something subtle but brilliant. The layout of the chinampas follows the lake's natural contours. They're not just dropped in willy-nilly. The builders observe wind patterns, water currents, even bird migration. It's part farming, part choreography.
The more you see, the more you realize these aren't floating farms. They're floating designs, entire blueprints for sustainable living. And all of it began here, with some reeds, some mud, a little stubbornness, and a dream of not starving. By sunset, the lake glows amber. You lie on your back, exhausted, as the last canoe glides by, its oars silent against the darkening water. You've got mud in places you didn't know existed, but you've also helped grow something. Something clever, something alive. And beneath your sore feet, the chinampa doesn't just float, it holds.
You wake up, or well, you drift up, to the sticky buzz of early morning swamp air. Fog clings to the lake's surface like a blanket that's been left in the freezer, and your hands are muddy from trying to scratch at an itch on your ankle that may or may not be a bite from something with more legs than you'd like to count. The sun is a pale smear just above the horizon, and you can already hear the soft splash of poles pushing canoes across the shallows. This, you realize, is day one of turning swamp into salad. Welcome to Aztec Agriculture Phase 2, figuring out how to grow food in a place no sane person would farm. It's hard not to feel a little sympathy for the Aztec city planners, if you can call them that, staring out across a semi-flooded basin of salt water and wondering, okay, how do we eat without dying? The first thing you notice, there is nothing dry. The ground is marshy, your feet are sinking, and every step comes with a soft schlorp. Tenochtitlan, the city they're dreaming up, hasn't yet risen from its future glory. For now, it's mostly mud, dreams, and a lot of annoyed frogs. The Mexica know they can't just drop seeds into the water and hope for the best. They need land, or something close enough to fake it. So they get to work. You watch as the first small teams of laborers begin building proto-chinampas, weaving mats out of reeds and bulrushes, then layering them with silt, mud, and anything else sticky and brown. It's messy. It smells like lake bottom stew, but it's theirs. One of the more inventive gardeners begins adding layers of rotting vegetation, almost like lasagna. Old corn stalks, dead leaves, fish entrails, every organic scrap is saved and lovingly pressed into place. You gag slightly at the smell. He grins at you like a proud chef, showing off a particularly bold compost casserole. For nutrients, he says, and gives it a pat like it's a prize-winning pie. What's remarkable is how quickly things scale. Within a generation or two, this isn't just subsistence anymore, it's strategy. The marshy edges of Lake Texcoco are carved into an expanding patchwork of chinampas. The Mexica don't just survive the swamp, they become swamp royalty. You paddle out with one of the builders to help scout a new location. He pokes the lake bed with a long pole, testing for softness. It's part science, part intuition. Too soft, and the plot won't anchor. Too firm, and the plants might not get enough water from below. There's a perfect squelch he's listening for, and he nods when he hears it. You just hear gurgling mud. As he works, he tells you about the challenges: flooding, mosquitoes, the occasional canoe accident involving an overly excited axolotl. Apparently they're cuter than they are helpful. But he also talks about the benefits: the ease of water access, the fertility of lake bottom soil, and the way the lake acts like a climate buffer, keeping things cool.
At first, it's all trial and error. The early chinampas, these floating garden plots, are basically bundles of reeds tied together, layered with mud, and topped with whatever organic waste they can get their hands on. Dead plants, fish guts, manure, corn husks, you name it, it goes into the pile. You try not to breathe too deeply. The smell is somewhere between compost bin and existential dread. And yet, these early efforts float. They actually work, sort of. The farmers grow beans, squash, maize. The water seeps up from below, keeping everything moist, while the sun bakes the top layers. It's like a self-irrigating raised bed on a boat, only instead of Pinterest influencers building these with cedar planks and fairy lights,
You've got shirtless men in loincloths dragging logs through mud and arguing over whether or not fish bones improve tomato yield. Spoiler, they do. The Mexico weren't the first to try this. Earlier groups, like the Xochimilca, were already farming in this way on the southern edge of the lake. But the Mexica, they take it to a whole new level. It becomes central to their survival, and then their identity, and then their domination. You hear the low thrum of a flute somewhere across the water. A child laughs, maybe from a canoe, and you begin to understand. This isn't a temporary workaround. This is a commitment, the kind that says, sure, we live on a floating island built out of mud and garbage. And sure, there are probably snakes under the lettuce. But hey, at least we're not paying rent. Historians still argue whether the earliest chinampas were truly floating, or more like semi-permanent raised beds fixed to the shallow lake bed. Some say they were buoyant at first, later stabilized with stakes. Others claim the floating part is mostly poetic marketing. Either way, the concept evolves quickly, and soon these muddy rectangles stretch out in neat grids across the lake, crisscrossed with canals like a soggy chessboard. At night, you lie back on a patch of dry reeds, staring up at the stars, and try not to think about the fact that your bed is gently bobbing. The wind brings the scent of damp earth, distant tortillas cooking, and something vaguely fishy. A willow branch taps against the surface of the water, like it's keeping time. You begin to sense the genius here, not just the labor, but the vision. In a world with no steel, no wheels, and no YouTube tutorials, these gardeners are quietly mastering an ecological ballet of water, mud, and sunlight. They're hacking a landscape no one else wanted and turning it into an empire's pantry. And yes, there are bugs. And yes, there's a fair amount of poop involved. But still, you have to admit, it's kind of beautiful.
Hey guys, tonight we drift back, way back, to the calm, eerie waters of Lake Texcoco. The moon's hanging heavy in the sky like a round obsidian shield, and the air smells like damp earth, wet reeds, and distant wood smoke. You hear the slow slap of a paddle dipping into black water. Frogs chirp somewhere close by. It's quiet. Almost too quiet, except for the subtle creak of wooden boats and the occasional whisper of wind threading through cattails. You're not quite sure where you are yet, but your feet are wet, and there's a definite mosquito hovering by your ear. You're standing at the edge of a vast, brackish lake in the Valley of Mexico. It's the 14th century, and honestly, you're not thrilled about the squishy ground. The Aztecs, or more accurately, the Mexica, have just arrived here too. They're exiles, wanderers, latecomers in a valley already bustling with more established cities and farming settlements. So, naturally, they pick the worst real estate available, a soggy island in the middle of a shallow lake. You're not sure whether they were bold or just really bad at Zillow, but it wasn't a random choice. According to legend, they saw an eagle perched on a prickly pear cactus devouring a snake. This wasn't just a gross wildlife moment, it was a divine sign. Huitzilopochtli, their patron god of war and sun, had promised them this sign would mark their new home. And boy, he really outdid himself with the mosquito-ridden lake thing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Hey, while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the shallows, reeds brushing your knees, and try not to think about what's squelching between your toes. In the distance, a few men are squatting on rafts of tied reeds, pushing them forward with long poles. These aren't pleasure boats. They're hauling mud, literal lake bottom sludge, toward a marshy patch of water. You squint. They're building something? It looks less like a construction project and more like a child's attempt at playing island maker with oatmeal and sticks. But here's where the story gets weird, in the best way. These people are going to take this swamp, this nearly unlivable, salty-bottomed mess of a lake, and transform it into a system of floating gardens that can feed an entire empire. They're not just surviving here, they're engineering the impossible. And they don't even have the internet.